Young people turned out in record numbers for the 2024 election, and a lot of them voted Republican, much to the surprise of many. I had the occasion to meet a very impressive young man. He is a senior at the University of Virginia Law School. He also has the distinction of being the chair of the Connecticut uh, Republican Legacy Organization, which is a group of basically young people who are Republicans and maybe not so conservative. We're going to find out. Welcome, Tommy Whiteley, to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is our pleasure. You know, a lot of our future depends on your generation, and there's been a lot of focus on it. What generation are you anyway? Are you a Gen Z?
I fall into Gen Z, yeah, on the older side, but I'm in that group.
I can't keep them straight. The baby boomers are the only ones I'm sure that I know, and that would be me. Uh, Translation: I'm old, but you're full of promise. You're on your way to New York to go to work for one of those highfalutin law firms that are paying you an obscene amount of money right out of law school. But you care enough about our country and your own generation and future to volunteer your time to the Republican causes. So tell us what you're up to, and um, help us understand why so many people turned out to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, so I think I'll start by just discussing the group that I'm affiliated with, our Republican Legacy. It's a relatively recent group. It was founded after the 2020 election by former Senators Bill Cohen, John Danforth, and some former representatives and Republican governors. And the organization is dedicated to promoting five core tenets of what were historically Republican values, those being free enterprise, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, adherence to the Constitution, and promoting unity. We want to be a big tent party. And so in my current role, I'm the Connecticut State Chair, but I'll be switching over to a more youth-focused role because of the reasons you're talking about. Youth voting is up across the board, across elections, but particularly so in 2024. And we'd like to keep that momentum going.
I missed one. I got free markets, peace through strength, fiscal conservative, something, and then unity.
Adherence to the Constitution.
Constitution. Okay. So those sound like pretty conservative values to me. I don't have a problem with any of those. In fact, I could join your organization today, right this minute. How much is it going to cost me?
We'd love to have nothing at all. Yeah, the organization itself is it's run primarily by people who have been in Republican politics for a while, and so the idea is not to push some new liberal wing of the Republican Party. It's very much adherence to traditional conservative values. Many of the people who are in the leadership grew up in the Reagan Bush era and just prefer the sort of small government iteration of the Republican Party.
I don't think it's ever going to happen. I mean, right now we got a $38 trillion deficit, and the new omnibus spending bill actually increases spending. There are no savings, and we're going to fund trans surgery, and it seems like we're off the rails. Tell, I mean, what do you think as a young, upwardly mobile male, white? What's your perspective on funding trans surgeries?
Yeah, and it seems like there's another one coming down the pike. And I think it goes to the larger issue, I think, with appropriations. And I think what my generation believes in government writ large is just pork barrel spending and the fact that people aren't reading these omnibus packages. I mean, it would be difficult to, given just how massive they are.
Yeah, 1,000 pages delivered 24 hours before the vote, best case.
Yeah.
Back to the subject at hand. There is a trend from your generation to show up and to vote Republican, and a lot of your age group are also returning to the church. Um, all of which I think are to be celebrated. Why do you suppose that is a trend? What has motivated that?
Yeah, I think with the return to church specifically, I think it's one of those things where it almost has become, ironically, a counterculture in itself because there's this prevailing narrative that young people are going out and they're doing all of these things that people associate with the left. And the way that you could push back against that is to go to church and find community that way. But I think community is the real underlying driver there. I think people are tired of social media. I think they seek genuine human connection. I think the church is a phenomenal way to promote that. So I think that's driving a lot of the religious resurgence and attendance at church, which I agree. I think is positive for a lot of those community elements. I think with respect to the voting patterns, I don't know that it endures beyond Trump. I think only 17% of Gen Z actually identifies as Republican, which I would say there's an obvious branding issue here, which is partially what I'm trying to go do with our Republican legacy and find a way to make it more appealing to young people. And it's true. Young men and young white men in particular support Trump as a demographic more so than perhaps any other. And that was true in 2020. It's true in 2024. Um, but we're finding now there was a poll from the Harvard Kennedy School in November of last year, and it found that majorities of Gen Z men oppose key parts of the Trump agenda. They don't like the ICE crackdowns. They don't like the elimination of vaccine requirements. They're against unilaterally firing federal workers. And that's even more so true for younger Gen Z, those born between 2002 and 2007. And I think most shockingly from that poll, they found that young men actually preferred in 2026 that there be a Democratic control of Congress by a 12% margin. And so I think what we're seeing there is a pushback to what's being perceived by younger people as more of an extreme iteration of the Republican Party. I think Trump did a great job of attracting young white men in particular into the coalition. But I think it's fraying with some of these things that we're seeing. And I think a lot of that is just the amount of time spent on social media. You see everything as it's happening. I don't think there's anyone in my age group that did not watch or has not been watching with rapt attention what's happening in Minneapolis, and that's impacting public opinion.
So, does your age group think it's okay to rip the federal government off of 10 to 30 billion dollars from Somalians operating fake, phony childcare facilities so they can get free money? I mean, how can you justify that? You say they don't like the deportation strategies, and they don't like firing people from the federal government. I mean, I don't know I don't know whether you're saying that or whether your peers are saying that.
That was reflected in polling, but
Yes.
what I think those are showing are that my generation thinks that two things can be true at once. I think you can think that fraud and grift to the tune of $30 billion is highly problematic, and you can also think that law enforcement officers that don't necessarily have a legal right to detain U.S. citizens should be doing that, or shooting people in the street using kinetic force against U.S. citizens. So I think there's some nuance.
Well, I agree with you, and, I wouldn't support that either based on the way you framed it, but there are 2 corrections that I think are worthy of noting. Number 1, these are not US citizens. These are people who have entered the country illegally. They are not entitled to due process under our laws because they're not citizens. Secondly, nobody's in favor of killing another human being, except when the person is using their automobile as a lethal weapon and actually run a police officer over with it. And then the other who inserted himself into a lawful arrest with a third party. I mean, there's some things you just don't do. You don't put your finger in a light socket, you don't drive drunk, and you damn sure don't interfere with a police officer in the performance of an arrest. I mean, does reality not factor into this equation?
I think it factors in just as much as the Constitution does. I think there's a right to protest, there's a right to bear arms.
Sure.
I was shocked at the administration's response, seemingly villainizing gun ownership and saying he shouldn't have had a firearm. I thought that was problematic in its own right.
Well, I don't think it was it was an issue of having a gun. I think it was having a gun in what amounted to a demonstration at best, a riot at worst, somewhere in between, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that based on what the Supreme Court has said and what the NRA and the Republicans have been fighting for, he was well within his rights to have the firearm.
I would agree with you, but
I
then
think generally speaking, it's what I'm saying is we have the highest percentage of independence ever in this country, perhaps since the founding. It's 45% of US adults are independents. And I think what I would like to do in my capacity at our Republican legacy is meet people in the middle and embrace that nuance and say with the environment, for instance, you can produce oil and gas in this country and do it in a way that's not inherently and seemingly deliberately inflammatory to environmentalists. And there are just ways to do this. You don't drill in the Arctic, but you can, and you don't have strip mining on public lands that people use for hunting and fishing. I think these are broadly popular ideas, and I think they're Republican ideas. But it's a matter of marketing. And I think what's happening now is the Republican Party is losing young people based on how they're selling these things.
well, I think you make a lot of sense. I'm not a what you would call a tree hugger or an environmentalist, but I absolutely am a conservative, a conservationist. I mean, I feel like we each have a duty to leave this globe in a better condition than in which we found it. And so I'm wholly on board with that. You can burn coal in a clean fashion. I think you can mine in a responsible fashion. And I'm 100% focused on not polluting our streams and waterways because that will have long lasting, very negative implications down the road. So those things I think that everyone should be able to agree upon.
Yeah, and I think that's just one example. I think if you look at trade policy, you don't have to, you can protect American workers without raising the cost of living and the cost of goods and going full bore on tariffs and protectionist policies. You can invest in domestic worker training programs. I just think there are common sense conservative and Republican solutions to these things.
Let's spend a minute. I like what you said. The problem I have is that I don't think what you said tells the whole picture. I mean, when you import a BMW into this country, you have to pay a 25% tariff, if I understand correctly. Yet when someone buys a Ford in Germany, there's a 10% tariff. I'm fine with parity. What's the matter with that? Why should we be giving the EU favorable trade policies when we have spent the last 60 years helping them rebuild and we defended them during World War II? I think that the disparate trade policy probably made sense 60 years ago. Does it make sense today when the EU's economy is roughly the equivalent of the US and they've got a slightly larger population? Don't you think it's time for everybody to stand on their own 2 feet? What's the matter with parity?
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with parity. I think it's a way of framing it, though. I think Ford has an interest in keeping in selling to the European market, and so if it's lower, you can keep it cheaper to get those goods going over there, that's advantageous to Ford. It's advantageous to American workers. I think the problem is what we're doing now is we're taking foreign companies and we're bringing them into the United States, and they're staffed primarily by foreign workers, and we're saying, oh, how great is this for the American worker? And that's sort of the result of a lot of these protectionist policies, where what I think is more beneficial to Americans is having American companies sell goods to the rest of the world at lower prices in a competitive price, but in a way that benefits American workers. So I think it's a matter of how you look at it. I don't think in some instances it is slightly egregious, and I think parity is not inherently a bad idea. In fact, it might be a great idea.
I was unaware that we are encouraging uh, people from other company to come and work here. In fact, I thought it was just the opposite, that the H-1B visa has gone up to $100,000 per worker and that there was a cap on how many you could have. Um, that doesn't sound to me that we're encouraging foreign workers, but we are absolutely encouraging foreign investment. And it's not exclusively foreign investment because it includes U.S. companies like Apple and Johnson and Johnson and other pharmaceuticals who've pledged investment in this country of $18 trillion. That is unprecedented. That's got to trickle down to the American worker, don't you think?
I think when it's what you're describing with the American companies doing that, I would agree. I think the foreign companies that are coming in, that are registered overseas, that capital is not being invested into the local communities. I don't think there's the trickle down effect. But in the examples that you're giving, yeah, I would think that's beneficial. But I don't think those are contingent on implementing protectionist policies.
Okay. Well, I think time will tell.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about the midterms, and what is your Republican legacy organization doing from the standpoint of activists to help us keep control of Congress, which I think is really kind of teetering right now? If my understanding is correct, with the resignations of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the loss of another Republican, and some other a special election that our margin is one. Yet we've got 76 Republicans who voted to fund abortions and trans procedures. That's a scary proposition to me.
Yeah, I think with the midterms, it'll be interesting to see what happens. We had the decision coming out of the Supreme Court this week that the California map is going to be upheld, or rather, the declining to take up the challenge. So, effectively, the same result. So, it'll be interesting to see whether that negates the gains that Texas made by redistricting. But the math isn't great. And so, I think what our Republican legacy is trying to do is, with regard to that last tenet of unity in a bigger tent, we're trying to get people involved at the local level, whether that be school boards or county attorneys. We want people involved, and we want them to be across the spectrum of the Republican Party. And so people are getting involved. They're doing a lot of outreach to local officials to get everyone on board with these tenets that we think are universally liked by Republican voters, by independent voters in particular as well. And it'll be interesting to see. I don't know what Gen Z is going to do. I think it's going to be very contingent on where the administration leads with respect to messaging over the next couple months in the lead up.
Well, I think you make some really good points, Tommy, and I thoroughly appreciate your coming on and talking to us about it and having a very responsible and uh, good conversation. Let me just ask you in parting, you're there at the University of Virginia. You've spent your graduate years there. Did you go there undergraduate? I don't recall.
I did not. I went to Brown undergrad.
Brown, and that has a reputation of being a pretty liberal campus. What was it like to be a student at Brown and now at UVA in the law school? Do you find a liberal bias on the part of your professors? And what's the student body like? And how does it feel to be a conservative in those environments? And can you speak up and speak your mind without being um, condemned or harassed?
I would say at UVA, I have to give them the highest praise. I think we've got professors across the ideological spectrum. And what I think is great about law school and what's very conducive to a healthy political climate is it's all grounded in facts. There's very little emotion attached to it. It's either something is true or it's not, or it's legal or it's not. And the gray area, you have ambiguity, but you have similar fence posts for the debate, which I think is useful. I think if you're willing to articulate your opinion and you do it in a in an articulate way, people respect that. I have friends who are very liberal down here, and I have friends who are far more conservative than I am, and it's a good environment. I would say at Brown there's a left bias in the faculty, absolutely. What I always tell people is I got very good at learning how to understand the other side of the debate at Brown, and I think it's hopefully made me a more effective advocate. But I think it's one of those things. I think people will respect a well articulated opinion, but to have politics enter every facet of social life got a little tiring after a while.
I can well imagine, but Tommy, you're a very smart individual, and personally, I mean, I went out to dinner last night with another couple. The husband is like me; he's very conservative. The wife, not so much. She's an admitted liberal. We always sort of go to neutral corners and don't talk politics too much, but we did stumble into a political discussion last night, and it was respectful. And she made a lot of really good points. And I think it's healthy to consider other people's opinions and points of view. I think getting locked into a belief because it's supposedly the right conservative position is not necessarily the right answer 100% of the time. So I don't see a problem in hanging out with people that think differently than you and I do. I think it's probably healthy in the long run. And in
Absolutely.
terms of broadening the tent, I think it's an absolute prerequisite if we're going to do that. So kudos to you for what you're doing. You're giving me hope for the Gen Zers of the world, and you're a dang good tennis player too. So I look forward to crossing paths with you again real soon. Thanks for coming on The Truth today.